Doing this at some point in our lives. And then there's all those different products out there. We could do have I been pwned, right? You can find out if your email, your information is out there in some kind of data breach. The next one, so password spraying, so the difference, right? Where password spraying is going to be when a bad guy injects common passwords into login portals because the application doesn't prevent common passwords like password 123 or 123456 or 0000. That was really common, especially if you think about older applications. And the outcome of the password spraying is one, either they're gonna steal credentials, they're gonna steal data, or possibly to disrupt service by overloading maybe the account login attempts, so the account gets locked out, or by going over the API limits, which will also disrupt service. And then the final one is brute force, which I think everybody's heard of for years and years and years. This is really used to disrupt service. And you hear about like DNS providers and websites and such getting DDoSed. Well, that's brute force, just injecting like crazy. And then it's done through botnets, and botnets are cheap. A lot of times it can just be computers that are infected with some kind of virus and they get taken over, or just a server farm, whatever it is. And those are account lockouts. Now that you know the attack landscape, so passwords. Well, this golden age of passwords made you very hackable, where 81% of data breaches were either weak or stolen passwords, right? Weak being common passwords, and then stolen passwords from those data breaches. And man-in-the-middle attacks, man-in-the-browser, and password sharing has made everyone even more vulnerable. And those super secret 16-character with uppercase, lowercase, number, special characters, and wingdings are super hard to guess, but diminish the user experience by being just as hard to remember. And frequently, they'll require the user to reset and recover their passwords often, right? So there's a lot of friction there. So the more passwords there are, the more help desk requests there's going to be, right? They're going to call, I'm locked out, and so on. And that's going to up the overall cost for IT and just the overhead there. And if you think about maybe even having some kind of password reset product, right? Managing that and making sure that that's secure. And at this point, I think we all know passwords are insecure and the user experience is pretty bad, but it's something that we're all used to at this point, right? So to solve the shortcomings of passwords, what we've done is implemented second factor authentication to add an additional layer of authentication that is based on something that you have, right? Your device, whether it's those hard physical tokens or maybe the randomly generated code on your phone. And while this is significantly more secure, it's a pretty clunky experience overall and will frequently require you to have some type of device, which you don't want to carry around. I think those things are they've been phased out pretty much. I remember back in the day, everybody would have on their keychain, right, a feet fob that would have the RSA secure IDs or HID. And but more recently, we've rolled out other different methods for authentication, like biometrics. So you're able to use things like that are already built onto your devices, like Face ID for iOS or Touch ID, and then Windows Hello for Windows, where you get a stronger assurance. And these methods are way better than as far as the user experience than they used to be. But a lot of times they require some kind of specialized hardware, right? You might need a newer laptop or a newer phone or something like that, or a fingerprint reader. And yes, to get rid of passwords, we really tried a lot of different things as far, not just OKTA, but the industry as a whole. Let's say Kerberos, right? If you think about Microsoft products on-prem, when you're in the office, no password needed, right? You use Kerberos, you get right in. Then you have other single sign-on methods like SAML, how you integrate everything with single sign-on. And then you have OpenID Connect, more modern. So a lot of different ways to try to get rid of passwords. The passwords are always there, right? A lot of different products out there still have passwords. And best practices are changing. So in June, I believe this was last year, NIST updated their digital identity guidelines. And NIST, if you're not familiar with NIST, they're the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is a US government agency. And one of their jobs is developing information security guidelines. And the new guidelines are a great validation that usability enhances security, but it's a big change from previous guidelines. And so what's new in this guideline? Well, actually, before that, if you're not, I don't know if everybody's familiar with Bill Burr, great stand-up comedian. If you haven't seen him, check it out. But much of what I did now, much of what I did, I now regret, right? Because the passwords, especially back in the day, we would just make it harder and harder and harder. So with that, what's new in these guidelines? So one, long free-form passwords are better than short ones with mandatory symbols and character types, which I think we all know at this point. You have right here, you have 4 random words back to back versus things like password. I think IT does this way more, right? When you get a new computer, they're like, here you go, this is your password. And you can't have a password should not be expire arbitrarily. If you want a user to choose a good password, don't make them memorize a new one every few months. And I think most organizations did that. They made it more strict or more longer, more special characters, more frequent changes. Nobody would remember it. And then make sure that attackers can't reset passwords. So no more security questions. One, they're super hard for users to come up with. So they end up picking really easy answers to guess, right? But 2, yeah, it's easy to reverse engineer those. And multi-factor authentication is important, but SMS is not a secure factor. Text can be intercepted, and carriers are a point of weakness. They'll reassign phone numbers to attackers. So using something like an application with push notification, Okta, we have one called Okta Verify, pushes it to your phone, you do approve, fingerprint for the biometric. So that's a lot more secure than SMS. And SMS also, you can't really force your users to lock their phone, right? The notification. So a lot of times by default, the notification comes as clear text. So if the bad guy sees the person's phone, or maybe they're sharing credentials, you have users sharing credentials, no good. They could just look at the phone and get that. So what's an ideal authentication experience with all of these pros and cons with the current authentication? Well, one, it needs to have a really an exceptional user experience. It needs to have the security protection against phishing, provide admins with the control and visibility to detect when something goes wrong. And then lastly, it has to be scalable as an organization grows and offer total cost of ownership so that your support team isn't just overloaded. And when I say scalability, that also means scalability as far as the different products and resources and such that you can put the additional authentication multi-factor behind, right? Being able to really provide an overall security versus one-off here and there. And so this is where we think password authentication can help solve some of these challenges and deliver on the promise of a better user experience. So friction, least amount of friction as possible. All right, so let's look at the pioneers. So one of them, well, look at the pioneer, Google. So Google did a survey of its customers and employees and found that passwordless authentication could deliver a secure experience. Using security keys like YubiKeys, it's far better than all device and knowledge-based factors to stop account takeovers. And last but not least, the surveys at Google also indicated that passwordless authentication methods were constantly faster than or to authenticate with than any other form of authentication, delivering a way better experience. Right? I think that's a given. Typing in a password is not fun. We're used to it, but it's definitely not the best user experience. So now pivoting over to Okta and how we're helping with passwordless authentication. So adaptive authentication context. So this is back-end authentication. So the continuous authentication piece, verifying the person is who they say they are, more passive authentication, I guess you can say, where we're looking at things like maybe where the device is, or what device the user is coming in from, the location where they're coming in from, the cities and such. Are they inside of the office network, or are they out of the network? Are they trying to use a proxy to spoof their location or things like that? So by using this context, securing that user even further than them actively authenticating with passwords and multi-factor. And then we have OKTA Threat Insight. So OKTA Threat Insight is our threat detection and response tool that aggregates data across all of our customers and applies patterns to detect credential-based attacks, such as brute force that I talked about earlier, and then also password spraying. And we think we then will identify the IPs that are involved in these attacks and mark these IPs as risky, or maybe not risky, whatever it is. And then when the request comes in, we check if the IP is risky. And if it is, then we'll block that access. And if it's not, then the request will go to the usual policy for authentication. And the set of risky IPs is available to all of our customers, but the action to actually block these is done by the admin who's managing OKTA, so you can actually enforce it or not. All right, and then so now for risk scoring. So for each user, we build a behavior profile using the past successful login. And when a new request comes in, our risk engine looks at the contextual data from this event along with the normal behavior profile, and then it'll generate a risk score. So depending on the risk score, the level will be high, medium, or low, and your admin can then set policies to respond accordingly. And in the event of an attack, when a request comes in, we know that the user has not signed in from this IP, maybe the location or maybe the device before. And then so what we'll do is set the resulting risk level as, of the login event would then be high, right? Because we've never seen this user before. And if there's a policy that requires the high risk logins to authenticate using maybe stronger factors, so requiring something with biometrics or maybe a push notification, then the bad user wouldn't be able to present that, right? They don't, that's not their fingerprint. They're not able to meet that biometric requirement. And then, so then they'll be denied. And then on the other hand, if it's an actual user, then they'll be able to authenticate successfully and then be able to go. And then now their historical data gets added into OKTA. So the next time they come in, they're good to go. They don't have to actually go through all of that. But if there's an off chance that your multi-factor is actually compromised, then bad user will then get access, and then this is gonna be an account takeover incident. Which, next slide, security automation. So in the event that there's an actual account compromise, using security automations, we can notify the user, and if they report a suspicious activities, it'll trigger a bunch of actions, and then you can even pass this information downstream to other tools, so Splunks and Slacks and so on. So just more security that we put into the actual authentication flow. So deploying authentication. So this is lower assurance, right? Password, talking about getting rid of passwords. So that's definitely going to be on the low end. And then as it goes on, higher and higher assurance. So security questions still not great. Talked about that earlier with the with security questions are generally something people will have a hard time thinking of. So they'll end up putting in simple answers. So then they're easier to get breached. But then also it's reverse engineering and then so on. So you'll see the end is the best is going to be biometric. Now, more modern factors are available. I think YubiKey is a pretty big one out there. We do support third-party ones, but then right out of the box for OKTA, we have phone calls, push notification with biometric, just a push, You have hard tokens as well, so support of YubiKeys and such, and just a ton of different factors. I think we're at like 16 factor types or something out of the box natively. Increase end user security awareness. Really, they're going to be the front lines, right? We can put all this automation and all of that in the back end, but training your users and making sure that they know if something is off is important. So by doing unknown device notification emails, MFA, maybe a new device got enrolled somehow. The bad guy got the credentials. They're trying to enroll a new device. Not good. And then MFA reset. So somebody has the credentials. Now they're trying to reset somebody's multi-factor. So now passwordless, the actual technology behind passwordless. So we're going to look at three major approaches that Okta offers for your passwordless authentication journey. So email link credentials, we have factor sequencing, WebAuthn, and then FastPass. And so email link credentials allows you to simply click on a link that you get in your email that gets emailed to you, and then you hit sign in, and then you're able to get in. And so this is going to be great if you have maybe an app that doesn't require frequent logins, a passwordless authentication experience for devices, and then bootstrapping users into your service before you offer them a higher assurance passwordless model. And this passwordless experience is going to deliver a great user experience with little limitations in terms of device requirements. And then next, WebAuthn. So the WebAuthn is a standard-driven passwordless authentication experience. And this is phishing resistant and can be used to solve account takeover attacks, man-in-the-middle attacks, and man-in-the-browser. And WebAuthn uses a token that's built in your device, like Touch ID, YubiKey, to deliver the authentication experience. Because there's no user credentials that are shared back to the actual server, this authentication mechanism offers the strongest protection against those man-in-the-middle type takeover attacks. And it's a great user experience. You just, like let's say my Mac device, I just put my fingerprint in, Windows Hello for Windows, and so on. And then also YubiKey. Factor sequencing. So by using factor sequencing, you can drive a login experience that you'd like or however you want. So instead of maybe just doing username, password, and then multi-factor, you do username, multi-factor, or maybe username, multi-factor, and then password. So their credentials aren't actually checked until they verify they are who they say they are. And that's going to prevent things like, password spraying, password stuffing that I was talking about earlier, the credential stuffing that could possibly lock out accounts, right? All right. So Okta's modern passwordless end user benefits. So actually, I just went over this in the last one. So user types in their username. You can then require their multi-factor, right? It sends, this is Okta Verify, Okta's MFA app, where you hit approve on your phone or your iWatch, and then, or Apple Watch. And then then you can do another multi-factor. So eliminate credentials altogether, passwords altogether. So then designing your passwordless experience. So if you're considering going passwordless, you have to first think you have to look at 4 key areas before you decide on your journey. So first is going to be to understand the nature of the security threats you have. Next is going to be understand the technology in play, understand how your users access those services, what devices they use to access those services, and then what the level of assurance that's going to be required for your business. Next, map out the user groups and understand the journey for each of those groups. How do they register their devices? How do they authenticate and then also recover their accounts? Also map out the user experience and understand how the impact of each technology is in reducing friction during the authentication. And then finally, it's going to be map the cost of deploying each technology. Passwordless options like email links are cheaper to deploy, since really you're just getting a link in your email, and offer a lower level of assurance, while using factor sequencing offers a higher level of assurance, but could be more expensive to deploy with factor sequencing and having multiple factors for users to use and so on. So going passwordless does have some additional considerations that are important to consider. The first is adoption. Users are going to be, they're used to passwords, right? And many users depend on password managers, so things like LastPass and so on. They're browser-based credential saving. So passwordless authentication is most likely going to break those known existing user patterns. Next, for authentication, the authentication experience, you would need to think about how your users are going to enroll. And in many situations, you may need to support multiple authentication options to ensure that so the user has something to fall back on, right? So what I mentioned in the last one, especially when you have factor sequencing and passwordless, you want them to have multiple. So you will have multiple device support required. Additionally, then you'll need to consider the security and compliance requirements that your business adheres to. So think about NIST, PCI, HIPAA, whatever it might be. All right, and the last one, FastPass. So taking that passwordless experience even further. So this is going back to that first slide that I talked about, where we have way more people accessing more resources, whether it's infrastructure in the cloud on-prem, or applications in the cloud or on-prem, or maybe public APIs or private APIs. A lot more people accessing from a lot of different places. And now devices have changed the way we work, right? Especially if you think about right now with the emergency remote work from home, a lot of different devices. But enabling passwordless across all devices isn't easy. Each operating system is going to have its own nuance in policies that can be enforced. So being able to you have to know what devices and think about that in your environment. So OKTA FastPass is going to deliver a consistent passwordless experience on any device from anywhere. So the user will register device using OKTA Verify. Then it'll be whether they're at home, are they in the office, anywhere they choose to be productive. Then they can then immediately single sign on into all the applications that are integrated with OKTA. So they would just go straight into Box, or they would go straight into Gmail without having to type in their credentials. And if you think about that, that's huge, not inputting corporate credentials, because let's say the device happened to have gotten a keylogger or something like that. And if a user's sitting there typing in their corporate credentials every day, well, then whoever has that keylogger has now stolen those credentials. So what this will also allow or give IT some buffer, right, for the endpoint security to pick up that possible vulnerability on the device. And so it adds that extra layer of security, as well as way better user experience, right? No password prompts, so you go right in. All right, and that is the end of my presentation. I think I ended way faster. I do have this afternoon an actual product demo to actually paint the overall picture, show you exactly what we're talking about. Are we doing Q&A on this?
It doesn't look like there's any questions in chat. But let's see. I should. No, it was really good talk. Thank you so much for being here. Do you have any kind of closing thoughts before we wrap it up?
Yeah. You know what? Oh, so here's the patch list. If you're interested, checking it out as far as the different products that I talked about. But yeah, passwordless authentication, especially right now, like I said, with everybody working from home, it's increasingly important to secure the identities, not just the devices. Securing the devices and such is important, but if you secure the actual identity, well, then, there's not really much that somebody can do without that, right? Tying it, eliminating those shared credentials and such, those allowing common passwords, things like that, enforcing multi-factor authentication across everything, implementing single sign-on to reduce the amount of credentials users have to remember and manage, a lot of different things to really secure your environments and overall really lower that end user friction, making it as easy as possible. Right at the end, it's end user adoption that's going to be important. So yep, that's it.
All right. Well, thank you again for being here and shedding some light on passwordless authentication. It's really interesting to see that the future of password security doesn't actually involve passwords.
Yeah.
I believe you have a demo coming up at 1 p.m. on the Show It track as well.
Yep.
So guys, don't miss that. And our next talk on the Build It track won't be until 2 p.m. So head on over to the Break It and Build It or Break It and Show It track and find more great content. Thank you again, Jeremiah, for being here and speaking today at the ExploitCon. And I guess unless you have anything else, that's it.
Yep. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Yeah.